Starting off with the U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to Seoul on November 7th, South Korean President Moon Jae-in finished the meetings with the world leaders at the ASEAN Plus 3 summit on November 14th. During this period, President Moon Jae-in was able to talk with the G2 leaders, the United States and China, who could possibly exercise influence over North Korea. And at the meetings with the leaders of Southeast Asian countries, President Moon also emphasized to resolve North Korea's nuclear standoff peacefully in the end. Since many Southeast Asian countries have a relationship with the reclusive state, their active participation will help a lot if they implement UN Security Council sanction resolution. Today on Peninsula 24, we'll analyze President Moon's diplomacy and evaluate his recent Asia trip. Stay tuned. For today's discussion, we are joined by two experts in the studio. To my left, we have a guest, Dr. Jung-yeop, a research fellow at the Sejong Institute. Dr. Woo, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me today.
And as always, with me in the studio, Dr. Kim Chang-su. Dr. Kim, it's really good to see you this week.
Good to see you again. Thank you for having me again.
Okay. So President Moon Jae-in's balanced diplomacy is put to the test at the meetings with President Trump and also President Xi Jinping. And there's a lot of meetings and the talks with the leaders of other countries at the APEC and also ASEAN Plus 3 summit. So how would you evaluate first President Moon's diplomacy this time?
The ASEAN countries have been in, they have not been considered as important as like 4 neighboring countries, which has high stake in security issues in Korean Peninsula. But those 10 ASEAN countries have diplomatic relations not only with South Korea, but also with North Korea. And those South Asian countries have been a key countries for North Korea to acquire their hard currencies and required materials for their programs and their economy. So as we are going to increase our relations with those countries, we would certainly benefit in North Korean policies as well as our economic prosperity.
I see.
I think President Moon has become a very active player on the global stage, not just on the peninsula, but also regional. Because as Dr. Woo said, the ASEAN country has become a very strong economy, as a matter of fact. And it's been a just tremendous, miraculous transformation, according to Mr. Trump, because ASEAN has become such a group of important economies and also thriving democracy as well. And as a matter of fact, we developed this kind of relations with the ASEAN country as a whole, like 10 countries, plus some other countries. Because we discovered this is a renewed values of the ASEAN country after long, like 50 years. So actually we spent a lot of time and energy to develop our relations with the ASEAN country for the last 20 years. And now is the time that we really come to a kind of point that we really value the powers and the value of their countries in terms of solving North Korean security issues. So I think Mr. Moon has brought the world attention to the Korean problem, why South Korea should be thriving more by broadening our cooperation with ASEAN countries and also just neighboring countries, because without their help, this so-called North Korean issue cannot be resolved, because they are too much interconnected world. This is a global world we're living in today. I think this is a very good opportunity for Mr. Moon to find a new values, even though he has been briefed about the value of these ASEAN countries for long. But I think on the spot, he will discover how important it is, and it will be for the ASEAN country as a whole in helping South Korea, solving North Korea, and also the broader Korean Peninsula issues in the years to come.
Yeah, the biggest event during his Asia trip was definitely the summit between South Korea and China. It's good to see that, and both agreed to restore the relationship on every aspect.
当前中韩关系和半岛局势正处于关键时期，我们相信今天的会晤将会为下一阶段两国关系的发展和双方在半岛问题上的合作发挥重要的引领作用。
한중 관계가 일시적으로 어려움을 겪고 있지만 한편으로는 서로의 소중함을 재확인하는 시간이었다고 생각합니다.
But a lot of people say that, well, there's no concrete result about the North Korean policies. So how do you think about that statement? Do you agree with that?
Depending on how we define the concrete or, you know, a tangible result achievements. I think because our expectations are running high, as a matter of fact, before the summit with Mr. Xi Jinping. But if, given the brevity of the time of their, summits, and given the all kind of other national interests, very long-term, so I think it's maybe it sounds like a repetition of their positions on North Korean issues and probably some other issues as well. But I think this is a repetition instead of just a negation or reverse of this kind of situation. It's actually a good. What else can you expect from a very short, like 30 minutes, 45 minutes maximum?
Right. So basically, it's a good and nice kick-off meeting.
Yeah, sure.
But it's China, as we all know, is a key player in the North Korea issues. And do you think this restored relationship between South Korea and China can have any impact or change Chinese active participation in the sanctions?
I think there are a lot of elements in calculating Chinese behavior, especially to North Korea. We certainly have to take into account China's relations with the United States. So even if South Korea's relations with China increased, I think that U.S.-China factor is very important. So I think it's important that we have restored the relations which has been worsened over the years because of the THAAD deployment and China's opposition on THAAD deployment. Both countries have agreed to patch up the discrepancies caused by the THAAD deployment. And there are a lot of things that has to be achieved because North Korean issue has not been solved overnight. So we have to focus more on how China is going to cooperate with the implementing the UN sanctions, and also whether our interest in solving nuclear North issues is going to be congruent with China's interest. So China's interest in North Korean issue might be different from our interest or the US interest. So we cannot just force China into certain action, but I think with the diplomatic ties more increased this time, I think we can expect more from China, which meets our national interest.
I see. So before the summit between South Korea and China, and there was a summit between the United States and China, and there were a lot of expectations and the rumors maybe there was going to be a big deal between the two states. But it seems that they more focused on the economic issues, and on North Korea, they actually, just assured that their own position previously they had. There was not much of discussion over North Korea, I can sense. So what do you think?
It is true that China has cooperated with the United States on sanctioning North Korea. China has never been cooperative like this before, and China is implementing UN sanctions, and there was a report that Chinese government actually had a raid on the farms near the North Korean border that is helping North Korean economy. But from the US point of view, that China's action still needs, they can do more than that, because as we all know that North Korea's economy is dependent upon heavily on China. So if China really wants to change North Korea's behavior, they have a lot of tools that they can use in their hands. But China's interest is not in suddenly changing the North Korean government or North Korean economy, because it might hurt China's own economy. So it is expected, some expect that US and China is going to discuss more on North Korean policy this time. But there was limitations that what both governments can do. China, they are cooperating with the United States, but U.S. require them to do more. And there are also the trade issues that you just mentioned, that U.S. has been criticizing China for like currency manipulating behaviors and other low-cost dumpings. So China and the U.S. has like trade issues, North Korean issues, and also the South China issues. That means that they have to compromise a little bit on every aspect because it cannot be just a one-sided game in every aspect. So it might be good if China and the U.S. Just made a deal to do really something on North Korea, but I think it's going to be very difficult for both countries on agreeing what kind of solutions would best fit each country's national interest. So that is why that it was difficult for them to agree on certain policies.
Okay, well, now let's hear expert opinion from China. We have Zhao Tong, the fellow at the Nuclear Policy Program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Hello, Dr. Zhao. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So many experts say neither Trump-Xi summit or the Moon-Xi summit produced any tangible result. I wonder how the Chinese media outlets see this.
The two countries were only able to say that they share the same goal of the denuclearization of North Korea. They agree to maintain strong economic pressure on North Korea. But that's almost all about it. There is no resolution of the deep disagreements between US and China about what to do next. Should we impose more economic pressure? If so, what kind of pressure should be imposed? Should we pursue diplomatic engagement? And if so, how to get started? There is no such in-depth discussion on these substantive issues. So I think in general, they were only able to appear cooperative and appear to agree, but in fact, they weren't able to resolve their more important disagreements.
Okay. President Xi Jinping, he started his second term as a leader of the ruling Communist Chinese Party. So can he expect any changes in his North Korean policy in his second term?
I don't see the China-North Korea relationship greatly change as a result of the new situation. But I do think after President Xi has consolidated his power in China, he is now in a better position to improve relations with South Korea and the United States. We saw this very surprising resolution of the THAAD dispute between South Korea and China, and that might be related to Xi's increasing power in China, which will have a very positive impact in the region. Seoul and Beijing will be in a better position to cooperate more closely together to deal with the North Korean threat.
I see. Well, thank you for sharing your insight. There was Dr. Zhao Tong, the fellow at the Nuclear Policy Program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So what do you think? So there's not going to be much changes in China, according to his opinion.
So even after all those diplomatic events, Dr. Zhao's view reconfirms that China's position on North Korea issue shows that China's dilemma in dealing with its policy toward Northeast Asia. That China certainly wants to denuclearize North Korea, but at the same time, China does not want to destabilize North Korea. So that's the dilemma that China has. If China pursues too strong policy toward North Korea, it might destabilize North Korea. If Chinese measure for North Korea is too weak. It cannot achieve the denuclearization. So China has to find the point where they can achieve the denuclearization. At the same time, do not destabilize North Korea. So it shows, his comment shows that China has dilemma on that issues.
What is notable this time through the summits and the meetings and everything that Korean President Moon Jae-in and also the President Xi Jinping, they kind of agreed with that the North Korean problem should be resolved through the dialogue. But it seems that the United States is not really on the same page. I mean, they dispatched 3 aircraft carriers for the joint military exercise in the East Sea with the South Korean Navy. So it seems like Seoul, Beijing, and Washington, they all have a slightly different stance and position on North Korean policies.
I don't necessarily think so. We're on the same page. But United States looking maybe at the first part of the page. We are looking down even down the bottom part of the page. Because United States still wants a kind of pressure against North Korea so that they could come someday to the negotiating table with the seriousness to talk about the denuclearization. So that's the first part of the maximum pressure. But we are more like moving to the second part of the same page. So I would say it's the same page, not different page. We are on the same page, but our focus is on the later part of this long-term diplomacy or engagement with North Korea.
What do you think, Dr. Woo? Do you agree?
I think all 3 countries' goal is to bring North Korea to the negotiating table. And even though U.S. increases the military tension on Korean Peninsula, I think it's the part of U.S. tactic to bring North Korea into the table unconditionally. So how we are going to bring North Korea to the negotiating room is somewhat different among 3 countries. So like China, they think that we have to lower the bar for North Korea to enter the negotiating room. But the United States, they cannot accept lowering the bar because so-called like freezing. Freezing is not acceptable to the United States because freezing implicitly means that they unofficially acknowledge the status as status of North Korea as a nuclear state. So the reason why U.S. puts a lot of military assets on Korean Peninsula these days is not preparing for a war, but I think it's for bringing North Korea to the negotiating table unconditionally before North Korea completes its nuclear and missile program. Because once a country completes its nuclear and missile program, then there is no freezing, there is no negotiating. So U.S. really tries to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table before it completes its WMD program. That is why U.S. puts a lot of efforts diplomatically and also try to increase the military tensions so China can do more on North Korea.
I couldn't agree more with Dr. Wood because I think this is what Mr. Trump has been saying, even though he came up with initially with a very strong pressure against North Korea. But what he really wants is not a kind of preparing a war and bring the Kim Jong-un regime into a kind of collapse. We made it very clear we don't want a kind of collapse of the Kim Jong-un regime, and we want just a peace. But to achieve that, we have to show our strength, power, so that they can come down to the negotiating table. So there is a long way ahead of us for negotiating. You might call me too optimistic, but I think this is exactly what happened for any 2 countries. If you look at the history, there is a time of pressure, and then comes final moments of negotiating. I think this is exactly what Mr. Trump has been doing, because he has been in power just 1 year now. So we have 3 more years to come, and we'll be more. I think we should be more hopeful that some kind of achievements will be made between North Korea, South Korea, and United States as well. And this is what the diplomacy is for, and this is what the government officials are paid for. So that's their job, and we have to be much more understanding of what they are trying to do, instead of just speculating, oh, this is a sign of another imminent war on the country. No, it's not like that. We want a peace, but we need a strength before that. So before, as we acknowledge North Korea as a kind of nuclear weapon state, once they gain that kind of status, world recognition, then there's no way to reverse that kind of situation. So that's why we are trying our best to stop them from approaching that kind of imaginary point of reaching a kind of nuclear and missile capability.
Well, what is more confusing to me than the three countries' slightly different position on North Korean policy is State Department and the President of the United States and their different positions on North Korean policy. I mean, President Trump is always, the rhetoric is really harsh, but the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, he also said that, you know, he actually mentioned about the talk with North Korea. He even said that there's 2 or 3 channels are working.
What is interesting, what Mr. Trump has been doing these days, he's been pretty much a little bit relatively shy away from tweeting out. I think this is the lessons that he learned after 1 year, because there is so much criticism about his tweeting out quite often too much. But now he began to get the kind of wisdom of abstaining that kind of tweets. And so I think he's kind of relegating this kind of role to his cabinet members. Oh, you do this job, I will do the much more bigger, important job. I think this is one of the lessons Mr. Trump has learned over the couple of recent months rather. And I think there should be no big conflict in our clash of conflicts between our countries, meaning North and South Korea and the United States and China. So as long as we can maintain a certain distance and acknowledging that you have your own national interests, which is not necessarily in conflict with ours. I think on that kind of basis, we can proceed in developing our more intercourse and dialogue and talk, so that eventually we can reach a certain point in time that North Korea will be coming to the negotiating table.
So not in the near future?
The reason why we have much discussions these days about the possibility of the U.S.-North Korea talks is that there was a report early this month that the Deputy Assistant Secretary Joseph Yun of the State Department of the United States confirmed that U.S. delivered a message through Russia that if North Korea halts its missile test for 2 months,
60 days,
so it might be the signal that U.S. has to accept that North Korea wants to dialogue with the United States. But the President Trump has denied the possibility of having dialogue with North Korea if they requires so-called preconditions to enter the talks with the North Korea. So North Korea does not want to have any denuclearization talks, whereas U.S. wants denuclearization talks. So both sides have still reluctance to enter the negotiating by accepting each other's preconditions. So unless there was a very important moment happening that it would be difficult for us to interpret, that might be the signal for 2 countries to have a dialogue.
Well, there is a report that President Trump is going to make some speech about the trade and the North Korean issue on 15th, which is exactly the sort of 60 days after the last provocation by North Korea. So some people are saying that maybe he's going to put North Korea back onto the list of the states sponsoring the terrorism.
So White House has announced that they are going to announce the result of the consideration, whether they are going to put North Korea back into the list. So President Trump mentioned that trade and North Korea, he's going to make some big announcement on 15th. So first guess might be that it's about putting North Korea back to the state sponsored terrorist list. But who knows? We never been right in predicting President Trump's behavior.
Okay.
You know, I think it's very interesting, like a 60-day halt on the North Korean military provocation. So I think this is a very enticing game for North Korea because they know the limits of their technology. And while they're giving time, if you remain kind of silent for 6 days without any conditions, this is very enticing to them. So why not? If I were the North Korean leadership, I would take this kind of and talk. So another thing is resuming talks does not mean that we are going to engage in serious talks, just resumptions. So quite often we saw resumptions just ending another failure, another stop. Right. So let's wait and see. Maybe this message has been gotten through to the Pyongyang leadership that the United States is really serious. Mr. Trump has changed the vision because thanks to this kind of change, extra pressures by the UN Security Council and also including China and Russia as well. So we'll see. The game just started.
Okay, we'll see. Well, Dr. Woo, Dr. Kim, thank you for your insights. And thank you all for staying with us. We'll be back next week with the hottest issues surrounding Korean Peninsula. If you want to find out what's happening in and around the Korean Peninsula, now it's time to tune in to Peninsula 24. Thanks for watching.